What did Hayden Panettiere's mom say about her? The final statement explained. Hayden Panettiere's mother, Lesley Vogel, has finally broken her silence after the death of her daughter, and her comments are raising new questions about Hayden's final years, her struggles, and her relationship with Brian Hickerson. Hayden Panettiere died on August 16, 2026, at just 36 years old. She was found unresponsive at an apartment in Greenville, South Carolina, where emergency responders attempted life-saving measures for an extended period before she was pronounced dead. Now, just days later, her mother has given her first public interview since Hayden's death. And what Lesley Vogel said was deeply emotional, but also highly critical of the people and circumstances surrounding Hayden's life. Vogel spoke to NBC News and reflected on her daughter's extraordinary talent, her childhood in Hollywood, her struggles as an adult, and the painful estrangement that existed between mother and daughter. She also directly addressed Hayden's on-and-off boyfriend, Brian Hickerson, and that part of her statement has attracted the most attention. So what exactly did Hayden's mother say? And what do we now know about Hayden's final hours? Let's start with Vogel's description of her daughter. Vogel said Hayden was an extraordinarily talented person. Hayden had been working in entertainment almost her entire life. She appeared in commercials as a baby, became a child actor, and eventually became an international television star through Heroes and Nashville. But Vogel believes growing up in the entertainment industry had a major impact on Hayden. She suggested that young people who grow up in Hollywood can face enormous pressures, and that Hayden ultimately lost her way. That statement is particularly significant because Hayden had previously spoken about her complicated relationship with her mother. Hayden's mother wasn't simply her parent. She was also involved in managing her career when she was young, and Hayden later described how difficult that arrangement became. In her 2026 memoir, This Is Me, A Reckoning, Hayden discussed the impact of having her mother involved in her career from such an early age. Eventually, Hayden decided she wanted to separate the professional relationship from the mother-daughter relationship. That decision created a deep rift between them. By the time Hayden died, the two were reportedly estranged. Vogel said she had not been in contact with Hayden since October. That makes her latest comments particularly painful. A mother is now speaking publicly about a daughter with whom she was no longer close. And yet Vogel still spoke about Hayden with obvious affection. She said she believes Hayden is now with her younger brother Jansen Panettiere, who died in 2023. Vogel said she believes the siblings are together and at peace. Jansen's death had been devastating for Hayden. She had spoken publicly about how deeply his death affected her. So Vogel's reference to Jansen wasn't simply a statement about Hayden's death. It also reflected how important Hayden's brother remained to her family. But the most controversial part of Vogel's interview involved Brian Hickerson. Hickerson had been Hayden's on-and-off boyfriend for years. Their relationship had been extremely troubled. Hickerson was previously convicted of assault involving Hayden, and their history included domestic abuse allegations. Hayden had also spoken publicly about the abuse she experienced during their relationship. According to Vogel, the family had been trying for years to get Hickerson out of Hayden's life. Vogel said the family had been concerned about him for a long time, and she strongly criticized his influence on Hayden. There is an especially important new detail here. According to the newly released police report, Brian Hickerson was at the apartment when Hayden was found unresponsive. His brother, Zach Hickerson, was also present. Police arrived after a 911 call reporting an unresponsive woman. When officers arrived, emergency personnel were already performing CPR on Hayden. The police report says the life-saving efforts continued for an extended period. Hayden was eventually pronounced dead at approximately 2:31 p.m. The report also says that Brian showed officers a bag of medication that Hayden was taking. Several other portions of the report remain redacted. Police also obtained information about surveillance cameras at the apartment complex. Investigators wanted footage showing Hayden, Brian, and Zach coming and going from the apartment in order to establish a timeline. But there is something extremely important viewers need to understand. None of this establishes that Brian Hickerson caused Hayden's death. Vogel's criticism is her personal perspective.
The police report confirms that he was present and that he spoke with officers. It does not establish that he was responsible for Hayden's death. Police have been investigating the death, and the cause remains officially undetermined while toxicology testing is pending. That distinction is crucial. There has been widespread online speculation because early emergency communications reportedly referenced cardiac arrest and a possible overdose. But those reports are not the same thing as an official cause of death. The final determination will depend on the coroner's investigation and toxicology results. So we should not say that Hayden died from an overdose as an established fact. We also shouldn't say that Brian caused her death. At this point, those conclusions have not been officially established. What we can say is that his presence at the scene has become a major part of the investigation and public discussion. And Vogel clearly believes his relationship with Hayden was harmful. Her comments also reveal something deeper about the family's history. According to Vogel, the family had spent years trying to help Hayden. But Hayden was an adult, making her own decisions. And that created a painful situation where people close to her could be deeply worried about her while still being unable to control her choices. This is especially complicated because Hayden had openly discussed her own struggles. She spoke about addiction. She spoke about postpartum depression. She discussed the loss of Jansen, and she wrote about some of these experiences in her memoir. Her life was therefore not simply a story about Hollywood success. It was also a story about someone who spent years trying to recover and rebuild her life. And that is why Vogel's phrase that Hayden lost her way is so emotionally complicated.
Hayden herself might have described her journey differently. She had publicly talked about healing and recovery. She returned to acting. She appeared in Scream 6. She continued working. And in 2026, she released her memoir to tell her story in her own words. So we now have two perspectives. Hayden's perspective, recorded before her death, and her mother's perspective, given after her death. They don't always perfectly align, and that's important, because a family relationship can contain love, anger, regret, resentment, and forgiveness at the same time. Vogel also addressed Hayden's career. She emphasized Hayden's enormous talent and the fact that she had been working since childhood. Hayden became Claire Bennett on Heroes at just 17. She later became Juliette Barnes on Nashville, a role that earned her 2 Golden Globe nominations. She also appeared in the Scream franchise and became known for her singing. For millions of fans, she wasn't simply a celebrity. She was someone they watched grow up. And that makes her death particularly difficult for the people who grew up watching her. Hayden was only 36. She would have turned 37 on August 21st. Now, her mother is left remembering the daughter she knew before Hollywood fame, during Hollywood fame, and through the difficult years that followed. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part is that Hayden and her mother were still estranged when she died. There may have been attempts to repair their relationship, but the distance remained. And now, whatever disagreements existed between them can never be resolved in the normal way. That makes Vogel's statement feel less like a simple celebrity interview and more like a mother's attempt to make sense of an unimaginable loss. She praised Hayden's talent. She spoke about her struggles. She remembered her son Jansen, and she expressed her belief that Hayden is now at peace. At the same time, she made it clear that she believes Brian Hickerson had a destructive influence on her daughter. But as of now, those accusations remain Vogel's perspective. The police investigation must be allowed to establish what happened, and until the official findings are released, speculation should not be presented as fact. So, what did Hayden Panettiere's mom say about her? Lesley Vogel said Hayden was extraordinarily talented, but struggled after growing up in the entertainment industry. She said Hayden ultimately lost her way. She spoke emotionally about Jansen and said she believes her children are now together and at peace. She also strongly criticized Brian Hickerson and said the family had been concerned about his influence on Hayden for years. And now, newly released police records show that Hickerson was present at the apartment when Hayden was found unresponsive.
while investigators continue examining the circumstances surrounding her death. But there is still one question we don't have a final answer to. What exactly caused Hayden Panettiere's death? Right now, that remains officially unresolved. And until the toxicology and coroner's findings are released, that is where the story should remain. What we do know is that Hayden Panettiere's life was far more complicated than the character she played on television. She was a child star who became a major actress. She was a mother. She was a sister. She was a daughter. She experienced extraordinary success and deeply painful struggles. And despite the difficulties of her final years, she continued trying to rebuild her life and tell her own story.
Her mother's final statement doesn't give us every answer, but it does give us another perspective on the woman behind Claire Bennett and Juliet Barnes. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is that Hayden's life should not be reduced to her final hours. She gave audiences decades of performances. She created characters that millions of people still remember. And now, as her family mourns, the unanswered questions surrounding her death will continue to be investigated. For now, the most respectful conclusion is also the simplest. Hayden Panettiere's story was complicated, her relationship with her mother was complicated, and her final days remain under investigation. What her mother has given us is not the final answer. It is one final perspective from a mother grieving her daughter.